Well, Cuba says it has uncovered a human trafficking ring that recruits its citizens to help fight Russia's war in Ukraine. Cuba's foreign ministry says the network operates from Russia and targets Cubans who live there, and even some who live in Cuba. The Cuban government says it's working to dismantle the criminal organisation and has initiated criminal proceedings against those responsible. Well, for more on this, we're going to go to Rosa Paya, who is the founding director of Cuba-Russia campaign. She joins us live from New York. Thank you very much for being on this News Hour. First of all, what more details do you have about this trafficking ring? Do we know how many people have been caught up in it?
Hello, thank you so much for having me. And I think that the first thing that we should understand is that there is no way in which the Cuban regime is going to acknowledge that they have been involved in sending mercenaries to Ukraine, because that would mean to cut relationships with many countries. And the other thing is that sending Cuban military personnel, or even worse, enrolling young Cubans to fight in Putin's war in Ukraine, is the latest contribution in the alliance between Havana and Moscow. Actually, from the beginning of the invasion, the Cuban dictatorship is exploring its political and military alliance with Moscow, and it's doing it in the diplomatic realm as well as in the information warfare. The Cuban regime voted along Russia to prevent that emergency meeting to discuss the invasion in United Nations, and since then has put all their diplomatic resources to work trying to convince other countries to vote with Russia, or at the very least to abstain in United Nations. And it have been also using their communications to support the fake news coming from the Kremlin. Right.
I just want to stick to the trafficking ring for the moment, if we may. Could you just confirm how many people you think have been caught up in it and what proof you have?
Yes, we do not have numbers of how many Cubans are now involved in Russia or directly in Ukraine. We know that the flights have been departing from Varadero through Aeroflot. We know that Cuban teenagers have been deceived into going to Russia to work on construction and other kind of jobs, and have ended up in the front lines in Ukraine. We know for sure, because there are many pictures and testimonies in the internet are public, that members of the Cuban military are now in Ukraine fighting on the Russian side. And we also know, and anyone that knows a little bit how things works in Cuba knows, that there is no way in which this operation can take place on the island without the knowledge of the Cuban regime. For instance, no member of the Cuban military can leave the island, can travel abroad without a specific permit of the Cuban regime. No teenager with a military age, in the age of going to the military service, can leave the island without a specific permit of the Cuban regime. So, of course, that we are not going to have the contract between the Kremlin and the Cuban regime, but the Cuban regime has a lot of explanation to do.
Yeah. How long do we think that this has been going on for? Is it something recent, or has it begun since the beginning of the war?
Since the beginning of the war, this alliance have been growing more and more deep. Actually, Díaz-Canel was in Moscow in November last year and literally said that Russia can always count on Cuba, and that visit was followed for a visit of Sergei Lavrov to Havana to discuss the alliance of Latin America with the Russian foreign policy. But since the last 3 months, we have been encountering more and more evidence of Cuban members of the military or just Cuban teenagers in Russia or in Ukraine fighting in the Russian side.
OK, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your insight and your time. That is Rosa Paya, founding director of Cuba-Russia campaign.
Thank you so much.